Is Toy Story 2 the best sequel movie ever? You see, in a world where sequels are considerably harder to do and usually fail to live up to audience expectations, there are a select few that do surpass the original, such as The Godfather Part 2, Empire Strikes Back, and Aliens. These great sequels surpass the original because they keep the things we love about the first feature film, while at the same time bringing something new to the table. And so with that, I am the Average Critic, and I'm going to tell you why Toy Story 2 is perhaps the perfect sequel movie ever. So Toy Story 2 came out in 1999 and was being made around the same time A Bug's Life was in development, and so a lot of Pixar's staff members were concentrating on making sure their second feature film hit cinemas on time. This meant that Toy Story 2 was a very slow development process, even at one point when they nearly lost the entire remnants of the film after one of the animators accidentally started a deletion route of the folder of the Toy Story 2 on Pixar's internal servers. Luckily, they had a backup server. So in the story of Toy Story 2, Woody gets kidnapped by a toy collector, which prompts Buzz and friends to scale outside of Andy's house to rescue him. One thing that makes Toy Story 2 a better sequel is its grander scale in story. In the original Toy Story, our heroes didn't travel far, with all the scenes taking place in Andy's room, Sid's house, with a brief shortcut to Pizza Planet. Toy Story 2, however, has us in Andy's room, random streets, Al's apartment, Al's toy barn, and a huge finale at the airport. What is it with films using airports all the time?
He's looking at you, kid.
That is weird.
The film also uses a lot of improvements that A Bug's Life had, which is improved lighting techniques, with the toys models looking much more smoother than they did in the previous film. The human models are a little outdated by today's standard, and were even one of the hardest things for the animators to design throughout the whole movie. But for the time and the resources they have, the film looks fantastic to this day. Not only do our set pieces get bigger, but so do our characters, internally speaking. What I love about A Bug's Life was its much larger ensemble of characters. We get that upgrade completely in Toy Story 2, whereas in the original some toys were considered background, witty, one-lined characters, now have more time to shine and show more individual personalities as Buzz brings along Rex, Mr. Potato Head, Ham, and Slinky. This is where the film shines in its humour, Rex going on and on about learning how to defeat Zurg, and Ham being the only single toy as he flirts with Barbie is one of the more standout performances that will leave you chuckling until the credits roll. It would have been easy for Pixar to concentrate on its two main characters, Buzz and Woody, like they do in the original, but because it bravely chooses to add multi-layers to all of its characters, making this sequel infinitely greater than the last one, which, if we learn anything from Spider-Man 3, is a hard thing to pull off.
If you know what I'm talking about.
Talking of the characters, we get introduced to a standout of new characters as well, with Bullseye the horse, Stinky Pete, and Jessie the cowgirl. This is where the film truly shines in its narrative, whereas some sequels that add new characters find it difficult because the audience has to accept them with a description of its original characters, Toy Story 2 does not. Bullseye is adorable, Jessie is hilarious, and Stinky Pete goes from the intellectual mentor to an obtuse but slightly sympathetic villain. Talking of Stinky Pete, despite not having a huge amount of screen time, in just one line, Stinky Pete adds a whole layer of character to him as he talks about being left on the shelf with every other toy being sold. It comes to show that not all villains are villains in their own right. Not a lot of films can take a character that seems to simply be there for just having a funny name to being a fully dimensional character with his own understandable motivations. But of course, the standout performance comes from Jessie the cowgirl. I think you all know what I'm going to be talking about, the When She Loved Me sequence. Now, Jessie doesn't shine as much in the sequels that came after this, and it's a shame because she's perfect in Toy Story 2. Funny witty one-liners?
Sweet mother of Abraham Lincoln!
Check. Understandable motivations?
I can't do swords again, I just can't!
Jessie.
Check. Beautiful gut-wrenching song? Once again, even if you add up the times, Jessie doesn't get a huge amount of screen time, but when she does, she sells it. Whereas most sequels push new characters to the back and concentrate on the ones they've already established, Toy Story 2 brings a new character forward and makes you care even more. This is what makes Toy Story 2 even more impactful. Every character is given time to grow, to have an impact in the story, and to make you care even more about the situations our characters are in. The song When She Loved Me is a clear indication of improvement from the last film. Randy Newman carries on from its predecessor to score the music for this film, and is an emotional improvement in every way. Toy Story 2's narrative also delivers something which no Pixar film had done at the time, which was bring a very thoughtful and emotional narrative. Toy Story was good and made you care, A Bug's Life is pretty and thought-provoking, but Toy Story 2 did something which we are so used to in today's more modern-day films, and that is tugging at our heartstrings and made us realize that just because it's a bunch of animated cartoon characters doesn't mean it's not going to make you care. At the time, most animated films were fun, family-friendly, with a sweet message intact, but Toy Story 2 brings a message of being afraid to grow up. It's a coming-of-age story. As kids who are afraid to grow up, get jobs and make their mark in the world, and as an adult who are afraid of our kids growing up, as well as growing old ourselves and having an impact before our time has passed. Woody has to learn that Andy will eventually grow up and move on without him, and be okay with it. The story is about accepting what has happened and what will happen. Even though Jessie goes through a traumatic life with Emily, she is willing to accept that things come to an end and that making another child happy is the best feeling in the world. Jessie in her time with Emily represents her as a child, being abandoned and afraid to grow up, whereas her moving on to be Andy's toy represents her as an adult, who is willing to do anything for her child and accepting that growing up is a part of life. At least, that's what I think.
You calling me a liar?
I ain't calling you a truther.
Toy Story 2 is perhaps one of the best sequels to ever grace us on the screen. Pixar have only ever done a few sequels, and even a good enough prequel. But Toy Story 2 stands out because of the strong emotional impact that it had at the time. These days, we are very much used to Pixar tugging at our heartstrings, and it's usually a huge reason a lot of the fans love these movies, myself included. But Toy Story 2 started the whole idea of a family-friendly animated movie can be more than just a flashy cartoon. It's an art form and shouldn't be taken less seriously because of its art style. I even managed to ask a huge number of my friends which Toy Story they thought was the best, and Toy Story 2 won by a landslide. So after all that, this gets my professional score of another perfect 10 out of 10. And my professional rating of 8 out of 10, which is the same rating I gave the first movie. I do prefer the first one, it speaks to me on a more personal level, but I do prefer the later sequels if I'm being honest. But Toy Story 2 is usually known as being the best out of the franchise, and I can see why. It still holds up and should never be missed. So thank you for joining me on this video. Tune in next week when we are going to be talking about Monsters Inc. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe? I'm doing weekly videos on all things Pixar. As always, any feedback on my videos, I would really appreciate it in the comment section below, as well as some of your best memories on Toy Story 2. So with that, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.